Well, a theologian by the name of Alan Watts tells the story of a Chinese farmer whose horse ran away from home. That evening, the neighbors of the farmer came to the house to commiserate and offer their condolences. The neighbor said to him, "We are so sorry to hear that your horse has run away. This is indeed most unfortunate." The farmer simply replied by saying, "Maybe. It's too early to tell." Well, on the second day, the horse returned to the farmer and brought with it 7 wild horses. Again, the neighbors returned and said, "Oh, isn't this lucky? What a great turn of events. You now have 8 horses." The farmer again replied by saying, "Maybe. It's too early to tell." On the third day, the farmer's son tried to saddle one of the wild horses, and while doing so was thrown from the horse and broke his leg. The neighbors once again said, "I am so sorry, that's just too bad." And the farmer replied by saying, "Maybe." On the final day, a war broke out in the nation, and all able-bodied young men were conscripted into battle except for the farmer's son, who was spared because of his broken leg. Now, what's the point of the story? Well, the answer is obvious. You shouldn't judge your situation too quickly, because you never know how it's going to end. Sometimes the thing we think is killing us actually ends up being our salvation. The Apostle Paul put it this way. He said, "Now I see through a mirror dimly, but then I will see face to face. Now I know only in part, but then I will know fully, even as I am fully known." Which is another way of saying we don't always have a full picture of what God is doing in the world. You see, the Apostle Paul wrote this letter to the Christian church in Corinth, which was a complicated and convoluted city in the ancient Near East. Simply put, Corinth had a diversity of humanity as part of its community that could hardly be expressed. The city was filled with all kinds of people from every background. Jew and Gentile lived in Corinth. Rich and poor lived in Corinth. Slave and free lived in Corinth. And this diversity within the community, well, it was causing fractures within the church. People just weren't getting along. They were arguing about all of the hot button issues of the day. They were arguing about all those things that mattered most to them. Like whether or not you should eat meat sacrificed to idols. Or whether or not it was okay for someone to get married before the second coming of Jesus. Whether or not it was okay for women to take leadership roles in the church. These were deeply personal issues to the church in Corinth. These were the issues that mattered most in their day. In fact, things got so bad in the community there that church members started to bring lawsuits against one another. The Apostle Paul said they were acting like children. But then he offered them a word of hope. Paul reminded the church there that though this was a difficult season in their life together, they still didn't see the full picture. They still didn't know how God would use this time to redeem them, to redeem the world. They knew only in part. They saw only in part. God reminded the church that, well, God can take even the most difficult of situations and God can bring good out of it. In his book, I'll See You at the House, an author by the name of Bob Benson recounts a conversation he had one day with a friend of his who had recently suffered a heart attack. Bob said his friend had emergency surgery followed by many months of recovery, and he was only just now getting back on his feet. So in an offhanded and joking way, Bob said to his friend, "So tell me, how'd you enjoy your heart attack?" His friend replied, "Are you kidding me? It scared me to death." Bob said, so you're telling me you wouldn't recommend one for me?" His friend said, "Definitely not. That's something I never want to do again." Then Bob paused. He said, "Now tell me, after your heart attack, does your life mean more to you now than it did before?" The man said, "Yes." Bob said, and you and your wife, you and Nell, you've always had a beautiful relationship, but is your marriage stronger now than it's ever been before?" And the friend said, well, yes. And Bob said, "You've spent so much time in the hospital recently. Tell me, do you have more sympathy, more compassion for those people who are suffering? Has your faith grown in this season? Have you grown in ways that you can barely begin to express or articulate?" The man said, "Yes, I suppose all those things are true." Bob said, "Well, let me ask you again. How'd you like your heart attack?" Yeah, sometimes the thing we think is killing us ends up being the thing that saves us. Now, that doesn't mean everything happens for a reason. And it doesn't mean there isn't evil and sin in the world. And it doesn't mean that sometimes life just isn't hard. It just means even in the most difficult of situations, God can still bring redemption. For what others intend for evil, God can still use for good. God has this way of taking those seasons, those challenging moments, and bringing good out of them. Because the problems we face in this life, are temporary, but the promises of God are eternal. Faith, hope, and love abide, Paul writes, and the greatest of these is love. Yes, we don't always know how God is going to redeem any given situation. We don't always see the full picture of where the hand of God is at work. I've been thinking about this passage of Scripture a lot recently, especially as I've reflected over the past 4 months. And I can't help but wonder if this difficult season of our life, the season where it feels like life is just killing us, if maybe it is the thing that is saving us. Maybe we just see through a glass dimly. And one day we'll see face to face. Maybe we know only in part. And one day we will know fully. Perhaps it's not a bad thing that we're being forced to deal with so many uncomfortable conversations, difficult topics like life and death, race and justice, hope and despair. Maybe those are conversations we put off for far too long. Because let's face it, we are a divided people. Our country, our community, even our church, we are filled with a diversity of humanity that can hardly be expressed. So it shouldn't surprise us when from time to time we end up fighting about those things that matter most to us. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe those difficult conversations are not a bad thing. Maybe God needs us all to be just a little bit uncomfortable right now so that we can mature and grow into the people He has created us to be. Because the problems we're facing, well, those problems won't last forever. One day we will know fully, even as we are fully known. So has this difficult season of life been hard on everyone? Absolutely. Would I recommend it to anyone? Definitely not. But has this season of life been bad? Maybe. It's too early to tell.